Counter-Strike is all about team play. Now, another way you might say that is teamwork, but I actually don't like the term teamwork as much because I think too many people associate it with like a structured approach to things and the idea of like, you're supposed to do this with me. Team play works better because even though people think of play as just being fun, in play in the sense of competitive discipline, sports, esports, I see more like when you undertake the game and you're playing the game, you're in a match, you're taking part in a match. Part of why it's play is because you're not just constantly consciously trying to impose this grid of what you're supposed to do and what you're going to do. You've trained yourself already, and then in the game you're sort of letting your unconscious, you're letting the subconscious play the game, and you're just letting whatever you've trained yourself to do take place. And part of what's fun then is you're riding that wave of your intuition and what feels like the right thing to do, and you've got a sense for where the opponent will be and what he'll do next, and you're responding in likewise, and therefore you're open to allow all of your mental faculties to interact with the game, coupled with your nerves, your feel for what's happening, your confidence. Everything can flow, and there's no sort of restricting factor that if you just lock everything into the conscious mind, it can be at times. But the reason why it's significant to even make that statement that Counter-Strike is all about team play, it's probably the most important element, is because so much of how we analyze the game can't take into account team play. We can't really address it very much. And therefore, we're living off in this world of the conscious mind and how it rationally would break the game down. And yet so much of what we see happening in terms of those key moments that decide a match, in terms of how a map is shifted so that a team that doesn't have a good winning record on it wins on it. Like, for example, when Quantum Bellator Fire beat Virtus.pro. There's times when it doesn't make sense for it to happen, but it does. And then you look at it, and there's something about it, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is that made it happen. And that's the problem with team players. It's essentially in a separate domain or magisterium that we can't really access or say much about logically and rationally because it doesn't really interact with that much. And the best we can do is talk around it. Now, the reason also why we can't address it often and why we don't and we act as though it doesn't exist is because humans like answers. We like to feel like we're smart, like we know what's going on. We like things to make sense, or at least seem to make sense to us. We like to feel as though once something happened, we were able to explain it. We were able to give reasons that were clearly why it happened. And thus, we don't need to worry about it anymore. We don't have to think about it anymore or toil over it or keep coming back to it and say, I thought I had something there, but it's not quite it, and I've got to keep working on that, or I've got to look at it from a new angle, or maybe I've got to destroy an old paradigm I had, or ignore a lot of things that I held to be truths, a priori conditions that I thought really were what informed and actually explained this situation, but actually it's just something I came up with afterwards as a patchwork happenstance quilt to explain away from me temporarily one thing that happened, sometimes to my ego, or to feel security, or to feel smart, or to feel as though we have a sense for the world and we have a pattern we can take and use to predict something. Because if you look at the game without team play, which is what we tend to do, we tend to look primarily at skill and tactics, and results tend to be a way of looking at an outcome of skill and tactics. That's how we see them. And part of the reason why we think of skill and tactics primarily is because we can see them. We can see if someone has immense skill. We can see in the stats if he has fantastic skill. We can quantify them. As I said, we can use statistics. We can break something down and show how something worked and how a tactic unfolded and how there was a pattern to it and how they repeated that. So we can quantify it. We can see it. The stats and the eye test bear out that skill and tactics exist. They're on a spectrum, and we can make our own gradations or judgments of where people are on the spectrum. We can disagree, certainly, but we'll roughly be in a vaguely reasonable area each in that respect. But then you look at the effect team play can have. Yes, skill can win you a game. Yes, tactics can win you a game. But team play is the factor that goes between, around, and above unifying all of these factors into making you a little bit better, a lot better, better in a different way, better in an unexpected way, better in a predictable way. But even though it's predictable generally, you can't specify exactly how it will show up, because team play can make less skilled teams perform better, have better outcomes, beat teams that are much more skilled. Team play makes tactics work more effectively. You can have great tactics and you can have exactly the right tactic called and you can make the perfect read. But if you don't have the right team play, you can't necessarily execute the tactic. Within the tactic, you might not be able to make small 1 or 2 man plays, which are very much based on how you worked with your teammate, what information he gave you, what sense you had for what will happen after you do something, or in coordination with you doing something. This is part of how we execute the tactics. I mean, a core principle of Counter-Strike, which I'll talk about in another video sometime, is the fact that one of the most key elements of Counter-Strike is creating 2v1s when you're on the terrorist side against a single person to give yourself the numbers advantage. Now, that sounds very simple. It's obviously a topic I'll go into in more depth, but that is one of the basic mechanisms of how the whole tactical game, and even the skill-based game, because you want to create favorable scenarios for your skill-based players, are created. I mean, in a very loose sense, it's been quantified as trading, but there's also an element beyond that where you want to create those scenarios to put pressure on the opponent and force things out of them, which goes into the chess game. Team play can let less skilled players play. Team play can let skilled players play in a looser fashion. They don't need every smoke and flash and timing and to know exactly when they go. But if they just played as 4 random people and the in-game leader just sort of calling something vague, they wouldn't be able to really accomplish a whole lot, actually. Just creating single aim duels with star players wouldn't win you that many matches, actually, when you get to the top 10 teams in the world. But if you have some team play between those players, that's what's going to allow you to get away with not having a ton of flashes, with not having a set strat. That's what's going to allow two players to take an angle, not necessarily in a way that they've planned or premeditated, but is coordinated in the fact that they're synced up, that the way that they play off each other and the team element creates a superior way to attack that scenario, which might not be as perfect as something you might put on paper, but the fact that it has unpredictability and the fact that you can create something new in the moment can have its own special quality that tends to play into how star players, skilled players want to play. Team play wins you clutch scenarios, and obviously so many games at the top level will hinge on how many clutch scenarios you can convert into your favor, or you can maintain control of to a point where the other team saves or has to go into a faulty scenario where their chances go way, way down. How does it do this? Well, team play allows you to punish mistakes of people. Allows you to mean that a team who's trying to do a retake gets decimated before they fully get the coordination of the attack to come in. If you're on the team doing the retake, it creates openings for you. The other team has the site locked down. They have the utility. They're in their positions. You've got to use team play, coordination to throw someone off, to change an angle they're looking at, to attack in one place, to create an opening elsewhere using the pressure principle. Problem is, though, as I alluded to before, team play is ethereal. It's the ghost in the machine. It's the third mind that exists or comes to exist temporarily when two people communicate and work together. They form into something greater than themselves, not only informed by each of them combined, and something else as well because of what they're then able to accomplish, especially against people who have lesser team play. It is unquantifiable. There is really no way to... You can sort of sense it, or you could maybe see it, or if you heard people's descriptions, you'd understand that something was. But the problem is your rational mind's still going to look at that scenario and break down the part of it that looks like a tactic. It's going to break down the part where a great kill was from skill, whereas maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was from fantastic team play and how it was set up. And maybe sometimes a kill here in a duel is because the other player felt uncomfortable because someone was creating map pressure elsewhere on the map that you don't see on that person's screen or on the radar necessarily. This is the reason why it's so tough to nail down. And more importantly, it is incredibly difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing to artificially build. A lot of team play forms naturally, immediately, and without much spoken communication, maybe getting on the same page mentally, maybe a few tweaks, but you're not going to go from no team play to amazing team play with an artificial process. It's generally not going to happen. Now, obviously, communication is another massive part of the game that we can't see as observers of the game. We're not in the server. We don't know what everyone's saying. We can't sync it up to the game. But I've always made this point. Right. First of all, communications is basically a subset of team play. It's a form of verbal team play, or it's something that informs what then becomes the team play. Hard to kind of differentiate between the two. And I often make the point, as I was alluding to, that spoken communication, especially a lot of spoken communication, is for me an artificial scaffold to build up communication and team play. Whereas actually a lot of the great teams, they don't need to talk all the time. They don't need to give all the info. They don't need to even sometimes say when they're going to go or what they're going to do, because that team play is there. It is inherent. It exists between them. They have sort of a shared mind in a sense. And so they have a feel for what their teammate's going to do, or they instinctively know what to do in response to what he is doing or what he might do if they do something in this scenario. So this is one of the infuriating things about it, but also something that makes Counter-Strike fun because it is the most valuable component. You know, you need skill, yeah, but you only need a certain amount of skill. You need tactics. You don't need the most tactics in the world, though. The more team play you have, the less of the other aspects you necessarily need. Or if you only have one and the other's not as much, team play can attenuate the what would be a disparity, a lack, a deficiency, and make it so you can win anyway, and sometimes over a team who has exceeding qualities in all regards over you, except team play. Because it's the most valuable component, and it's so hard to artificially create, and it's very hard to predict when you're going against a team. How will their team work based on that? I can look at what their strat is and what would logically counter that and what would work against that and how I can minimize them countering what I do. And I can look at the skill of my players and put them in favorable situations. But how are they going to team play off that? This is one of the reasons why making lineups will always be a gamble. You can try and make a very informed gamble, and you can try and pick players that you trust the qualities of, and your sense for how they might play together can give you an optimism it will work, but you can never be certain. There will be always lineups that look amazing on paper and don't work, and there'll be lineups that don't look particularly good at all and turn out to be pretty good, sometimes fabulous. Hence, scouting players becomes so difficult, because even if this guy's a good player, and even if his teammates are good players, and even if that style of a player and role of a player seems to fit with a different style of player and different role of player, and historically they've played with players similar to each other, and the tactical system and approach and mentality seems to fit, there still might not be that connect, because the connect takes place invisibly. It takes place within the mind, it takes place within the subconscious, it takes place within that moment in which all of these things overlap, and you somehow make a decision that's not entirely conscious of what you're going to do, and you play. And then the team component comes in, and team play becomes one of the overarching factors within the game, even though we'll never be able to quantify it or really pin it down. This video was made possible by Dean Tanglis, Sanity, Gman, Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Travis T. Greb. Just like my man, a lot of people think you can't tell me nothing, but I've graduated from that mindset, and now it is possible to have influence over some of the people I have on my shows, some of the topics I cover, to ask me questions directly and get exclusive teasers for upcoming projects I'm working on. Unlock the code to the streets and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link below.